What happens when a calm, composed Hollywood icon suddenly finds herself pushed into a tense, unscripted debate on live television? Make sure to subscribe to the Star Talks and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The cameras are already rolling on The View, and the energy feels slightly different today. There's a buzz in the audience that doesn't usually happen during the opening segment. Maybe it's the guest, maybe it's the topic, or maybe it's something no one can quite predict yet. At the table, the hosts are mid-discussion, with Alyssa Farah Griffin leaning forward, her tone measured but firm. Across from her, Nicole Kidman sits poised, legs crossed, hands resting calmly in her lap, listening closely. Alyssa is finishing a point. I just think, when celebrities step into political or social conversations, there's a responsibility there. Because people listen. Millions of people listen. There's a light murmur from the audience. Some nodding, some shifting in seats. Nicole tilts her head slightly, her expression still polite, but more focused now. She waits half a second before responding. Well, I agree there's a responsibility, she says softly, her voice calm but clear. But I also think it's important to remember that we're human first. We're allowed to have opinions. Alyssa gives a quick smile, but it's tight. Of course, no one's saying you're not allowed. But when your platform is that large, it's not just a personal opinion anymore. It influences real-world thinking. You can feel the shift. It's subtle, but it's there. One of the other hosts tries to ease in. I think what Alyssa's saying is, there's weight behind celebrity voices, right? Nicole nods slowly. Yes, and I understand that. But I also think it can become a way to silence people. Like, you're famous, so you shouldn't speak. That feels a bit unfair. A few claps ripple through the audience. Alyssa leans in again, this time more direct. I don't think anyone's trying to silence you. But there's a difference between sharing a perspective and shaping narratives that might not fully reflect reality. Nicole's posture straightens just slightly. It's almost unnoticeable, but it changes the tone. And who decides what reality is? She asks, still calm, but now with a sharper edge. The audience reacts immediately, some oohs, a few claps, a few surprised looks exchanged. Alyssa pauses, just for a moment. I think facts do, she replies. And experts. And people who live those experiences every day. Nicole nods again, but this time it's slower. More deliberate. And what if those experiences are different from what's being presented as fact? She asks. There's a beat of silence. One of the co-hosts tries to lighten the mood. Okay, we're getting deep early today, she laughs nervously, glancing at the audience. But the tension doesn't fully break. Alyssa keeps her gaze on Nicole. Then I think it's important to listen more than speak, she says. That lands. Nicole's expression shifts, still composed, but now unmistakably more serious. I do listen, she responds. A lot. More than people probably assume. Alyssa nods quickly. I'm sure you do. But when statements are made publicly, they can sometimes overshadow quieter voices. Nicole leans slightly forward now. It's the first time she's physically moved into the conversation. But doesn't that apply to everyone here at this table too? She asks. The audience reacts again, this time louder. Alyssa blinks, caught slightly off guard. We're journalists and commentators, she says. That's our role. Nicole doesn't interrupt. She lets Alyssa finish. And we're held accountable for what we say, Alyssa adds. Nicole nods once more. And so are we, she replies. Every single day. Sometimes in ways that are incredibly intense. There's a shift in the room again, this time more empathetic. One audience member claps softly. Others follow. But Alyssa isn't backing down. I don't doubt that, she says. But accountability in entertainment and accountability in shaping public opinion aren't always the same. Nicole's eyes narrow just slightly, not in anger but in focus. I think they overlap more than you're suggesting, she says. The host sitting between them raises her hands slightly. Okay, this is getting interesting, she says, smiling, trying to keep control of the segment. Let's take a step back for a second. But neither Nicole nor Alyssa fully disengage. Alyssa turns slightly toward the rest of the panel, but keeps Nicole in her peripheral view. All I'm saying is, when someone with global influence speaks on complex issues, there's a risk of oversimplifying things. Nicole responds almost immediately. Or there's an opportunity to bring attention to them. That gets applause. Alyssa nods, acknowledging the point. That's fair. But attention without depth can sometimes do more harm than good. Nicole takes a breath. You can see she's choosing her words carefully now. And silence can do harm too, she says. That line lands heavier than anything so far. The audience reacts with a mix of applause and murmurs. One of the co-hosts jumps in quickly. I think both of you are making really valid points, she says, trying to balance the conversation. It's about finding that middle ground, right? But the energy at the table suggests they're not quite there yet. Nicole sits back slightly, but her gaze stays steady. I just don't think it's helpful to assume that someone isn't informed just because they're an actor, she says. Alyssa responds calmly, but there's a firmness now. And I don't think it's unreasonable to expect a higher level of care when speaking to millions. There's another pause. The audience is completely locked in now. Even the hosts who usually jump in with humor or side comments are quieter. Nicole gives a small nod. That's fair, she says. But care goes both ways. It includes how we talk about each other, too. Alyssa's expression softens just slightly, but the tension is still there. Agreed, she says. For a brief moment, it feels like the conversation might settle. But then one of the hosts leans in with a question that shifts everything again. So Nicole, she says, have you ever felt misunderstood when speaking out on issues like this? Nicole exhales softly. Yes, she says. More times than I can count. Alyssa watches her closely. And how do you handle that? The host asks. Nicole pauses, then answers honestly. Sometimes not very well, she admits. The audience reacts with a soft, empathetic ah. But Alyssa follows up quickly. Do you ever think that misunderstanding comes from how the message is delivered? She asks. And just like that, the tension spikes again. Nicole turns back to her, this time more directly than before. Or from how it's received, she replies. The audience reacts loudly now, some clapping, some gasping. The conversation has officially crossed into something deeper, more personal, and far less predictable than anyone expected at the start of the show. And it's only just beginning. The energy at the table doesn't settle after that last exchange. It lingers, thick and noticeable, the kind of tension that makes even the audience sit a little straighter in their seats. You can almost feel everyone recalibrating in real time. One of the co-hosts lets out a small breath and tries to bring a bit of balance back. Okay, I think we're getting into something really important here, she says, glancing between Nicole Kidman and Alyssa Farah Griffin. This idea of intention versus perception, it's something we all deal with, not just celebrities. Nicole nods slightly, but she doesn't look away from Alyssa. Exactly, she says. And I think sometimes people assume intention without actually asking. Alyssa leans back for a moment, folding her hands on the table. She's listening, but there's a clear readiness to respond. I hear that, she says. But perception matters just as much, especially when you're speaking to such a large audience. Nicole's expression tightens just a little, not defensive, but focused. It does, but perception isn't always accurate. A soft ripple of agreement moves through part of the audience. Alyssa nods. That's true, but if a large group of people are interpreting something the same way, it's worth examining why. Nicole pauses for a second before answering. And I do examine that, she says. But I don't think the answer is to stop speaking. I think the answer is to have more conversations, like this one. There's a brief moment of shared acknowledgement there, but it doesn't fully diffuse things. Another host leans in, sensing the need to widen the discussion. Let me ask both of you this, she says. Do you think there's a double standard when it comes to who gets to speak on certain issues? The audience perks up at that. It's a question that shifts the conversation from personal to broader, and potentially more heated. Alyssa answers first. I think there can be, she says. But I also think expertise matters. Lived experience matters. And sometimes celebrity voices can unintentionally overshadow those perspectives. Nicole listens without interrupting, then responds. I agree that lived experience matters deeply, she says. But I don't think empathy should be limited. Just because you haven't lived something doesn't mean you can't care about it, speak about it, or try to bring attention to it. Applause breaks out, louder this time. Alyssa nods, acknowledging the reaction. Absolutely. Empathy is important. But there's a difference between amplifying voices and becoming the voice. That line lands with a different kind of weight. Nicole leans forward again, this time more noticeably. But what if the intention is to amplify? She asks. What if that's the goal? Alyssa responds quickly. Then I think the focus should stay on those voices, not shift toward the person amplifying them. Nicole's eyes stay locked on hers. And who decides when that shift happens? She asks. The audience reacts again, this time with a mix of applause and a few audible sounds. One of the co-hosts raises her eyebrows slightly. Okay, this is a real debate, she says, half laughing, but clearly aware of how serious it's getting. Alyssa takes a small breath before answering. I think the public does, she says. And media. And the way conversations are framed. Nicole nods slowly. And sometimes those frameworks are flawed, she replies. There's a pause. Alyssa tilts her head slightly. Can you give an example? She asks. It's a direct challenge, but not aggressive. Still, it shifts the pressure onto Nicole. Nicole doesn't rush. I think there have been times, she begins, choosing her words carefully, where something I've said was taken out of context or reduced to a headline that didn't reflect the full conversation. The audience murmurs in recognition. That's something people understand. Alyssa nods. That happens in media, absolutely, she says. But that's also part of the reality of speaking publicly. It's why clarity matters so much. Nicole's tone becomes slightly firmer. Clarity matters, yes. But so does fairness. That line lands quietly but strongly. Alyssa's expression tightens just a bit. Fairness goes both ways, she says. The audience deserves clear, accurate messaging. Nicole doesn't hesitate this time. And the speaker deserves to be heard in full. The audience reacts again, some clapping, some leaning toward each other, whispering. One of the hosts quickly jumps in. Okay, I think we're touching on something bigger here. Trust, she says. Trust between public figures, media, and the audience. That word hangs in the air. Alyssa nods. Exactly, she says. Trust is built on consistency and accuracy. Nicole responds just as quickly. And also on openness and understanding. They're not interrupting each other, but they're not yielding either. Another host tries to inject a bit of perspective. I think what's interesting is that both of you are kind of saying the same thing from different angles, she says. You're both talking about responsibility. Nicole glances at her briefly, then back to Alyssa. Yes, she says. But responsibility shouldn't feel like a restriction. Alyssa leans forward again. I don't think it's a restriction, she says. I think it's a safeguard. Nicole's eyebrows lift slightly. For who? She asks. That question shifts the tone again, sharper now. Alyssa pauses just for a second. For the public, she says. For people who rely on information being accurate. Nicole nods, but her expression suggests she's not fully convinced. And who safeguards the people speaking? She asks. The audience reacts, this time louder. A few claps, a few surprised laughs. One of the co-hosts looks between them, clearly aware this is no longer a light segment. Okay, we're getting into some real territory here, she says. Alyssa responds, her tone steady but more intense now. Public figures have teams, platforms, resources, she says. The average person doesn't. Nicole doesn't look away. That doesn't make them immune to being misunderstood or misrepresented, she replies. Alyssa nods. No, it doesn't. But it does give them more control over their message. Nicole shakes her head slightly. Not always, she says. Once something is out there, it takes on a life of its own. That resonates with the audience. There's a noticeable hum of agreement. One of the hosts turns to the audience briefly. I think a lot of people can relate to that, even on a smaller scale, she says. But Alyssa circles back. That's exactly why it's so important to be careful before speaking, she says. Nicole's tone softens slightly, but her point doesn't. And that's why it's important to allow room for conversation after speaking, she says. There's a pause. For a moment, it feels like they might be reaching some kind of understanding, but it's fragile. Then Alyssa asks something that shifts the tone again. Do you think, she begins, that celebrities sometimes step into conversations they're not fully informed on? The question is direct. The audience reacts immediately, some gasps, some murmurs. Nicole doesn't answer right away. She takes a breath, then responds carefully. I think that can happen with anyone, she says. Not just celebrities. Alyssa nods. That's fair, she says. But when it happens at that level, the impact is bigger. Nicole leans in slightly. And so is the scrutiny, she replies. Alyssa meets her gaze. Scrutiny comes with influence. Nicole doesn't back down. So does responsibility to engage, not withdraw. There's a noticeable shift now. The conversation feels more personal, even if neither of them is raising their voice. One of the co-hosts tries to lighten the tone again. Okay, I feel like we need to take a breath, she says with a small laugh. This is intense, but in a good way. A few audience members laugh, but the tension doesn't fully break. Nicole sits back slightly, but her expression remains serious. I just think it's important not to reduce people to their profession, she says. There's more to who we are than what we do. Alyssa responds almost immediately. And I think it's important to recognize the impact of the platform that profession gives you. They're circling the same core issue, but neither is stepping away from it. The audience is completely silent now, listening closely. Even the hosts seem to be choosing their moments more carefully. And just when it feels like the conversation might plateau, one of the hosts asks a question that pushes it into even more personal territory. Nicole, she says gently, has there ever been a moment where you regretted speaking out? The question hangs in the air. Nicole looks down briefly, then back up. And before she answers, you can see something shift in her expression. Something more personal, more vulnerable. Alyssa watches closely. The audience leans in, because whatever comes next is going to take this conversation somewhere even deeper. There's a noticeable stillness at the table after that question lands. Even the usual background murmurs from the audience fade. All eyes are on Nicole Kidman now. She doesn't answer immediately. She takes a breath, her fingers lightly interlacing on the table, then separating again. It's a small movement, but it says a lot. When she finally looks up, her voice is softer than before, but more deliberate. Yes, she says. There have been moments. The audience reacts quietly, no loud applause this time, just a collective lean in. Across from her, Alyssa Farah Griffin doesn't interrupt. She watches closely, her posture still, but attentive. Nicole continues. Not because I didn't believe what I was saying, she adds, but because of how it was received and what it turned into afterward. There's a slight shift in the room. The tension doesn't disappear, but it changes shape. It feels less like a debate and more like something being unpacked. One of the co-hosts nods gently. That's honest, she says. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, even outside of being in the public eye. Nicole gives a small nod of acknowledgement, then glances briefly toward Alyssa before continuing. It's difficult, she says, because you want to contribute. You want to be part of the conversation. But sometimes the conversation becomes something else entirely. Alyssa leans forward slightly, her tone still composed, but more measured now. Can I ask, she says, what you mean by something else? Nicole doesn't hesitate this time. It becomes about you, she says, instead of the issue. That line lands heavily. The audience responds with a mix of soft applause and murmurs of agreement. Alyssa nods slowly. I understand that, she says. And I think that's a fair criticism of how media cycles work sometimes. There's a brief moment where it feels like common ground is forming. But Alyssa continues. However, she adds, isn't that also part of the risk when you have a very visible platform? That the focus will shift to you, whether you want it to or not. Nicole's expression tightens just slightly, not defensive, but firm again. Yes, she says. It is a risk, but that doesn't mean the intention should be dismissed. Alyssa responds calmly. I'm not dismissing intention, she says. I'm questioning impact. That distinction lands clearly. Nicole leans back for a second, then forward again, as if deciding to meet that point head-on. Impact matters, she says. But impact isn't always immediate or obvious. Sometimes it's long-term. Sometimes it's about starting a conversation that evolves. Alyssa tilts her head slightly. But if that conversation starts with misinformation, or even incomplete information, it can lead people in the wrong direction, she says. The audience reacts, some nodding, some shifting uncomfortably. Nicole responds quickly. And if people are too afraid to speak because they might not get everything perfect, then important conversations don't happen at all. That draws louder applause. One of the co-hosts raises her hand slightly. Okay, that's a strong point, she says. Because there's definitely a fear now. People worry about saying the wrong thing. Alyssa nods. I agree, she says. But I don't think the solution is to lower the standard. I think it's to raise awareness and encourage more informed dialogue. Nicole looks directly at her. And I think informed dialogue includes allowing people to learn publicly, she says. That line shifts the energy again. Alyssa pauses, considering it. That's fair, she says slowly. But public learning can have real consequences. Nicole doesn't look away. So can public silence, she replies. There's a beat. The audience reacts again, this time louder, more divided. Some clap immediately, others hesitate. One of the hosts tries to bridge the gap. It sounds like you're both talking about responsibility in different ways, she says. One is about being careful before speaking, and the other is about not being afraid to speak at all. Nicole nods slightly. Yes, she says. Alyssa nods too. That's accurate, she agrees. For a brief moment, it feels like the conversation might stabilize again. But then Alyssa leans in just a bit more, her tone still calm but more pointed. Can I ask you something directly? She says. Nicole nods. Of course. Alyssa takes a breath. Do you think there's ever a moment where it's better for someone with your level of influence to step back and let others lead the conversation entirely? The audience reacts immediately, some gasps, some whispers. It's not an aggressive question, but it's a loaded one. Nicole takes a second before answering. I think there are moments to step back, she says. Absolutely. Alyssa nods, as if encouraging her to continue. But I don't think that means stepping away completely, Nicole adds. I think it means knowing when to listen, when to support, and when to speak. Alyssa responds quickly. But how do you decide when that moment is? She asks. Nicole's tone becomes more grounded now, less reactive, more reflective. By listening, she says. By engaging with people who are directly affected. By being open to being wrong. That line draws a strong reaction, applause louder this time. Alyssa acknowledges it with a small nod. That's important, she says. But being open to being wrong also means accepting when criticism is valid. Nicole meets her gaze. I do accept that, she says. What I struggle with is when criticism becomes assumption. The audience murmurs again. Alyssa leans back slightly. Can you explain that? She asks. Nicole nods. There's a difference between someone saying, I disagree with what you said, and someone saying, you shouldn't have said anything at all, she explains. That distinction resonates. There's a noticeable reaction from the audience. Alyssa considers it. That's fair, she says. But I think some people feel that certain conversations require a level of expertise or lived experience that not everyone has. Nicole responds almost immediately. And I respect that, she says. But I don't think that should exclude empathy or participation. The back and forth is steady now. No interruptions, no raised voices, but the intensity is undeniable. One of the co-hosts looks between them. This is actually a really important conversation, she says. Because it's something we're all navigating right now. The audience claps briefly. But Alyssa isn't done. Do you ever worry, she asks, that even with the best intentions, your voice might unintentionally drown out the voices you're trying to support? That question lands harder than the last one. Nicole pauses again. This time it's longer. She looks down for a moment, then back up. Yes, she says quietly. I do. The audience reacts with a softer, more empathetic tone. And that's something I think about constantly, she continues. It's not something I take lightly. Alyssa nods slowly. I appreciate you saying that, she says. For the first time in a while, there's a slight softening in her tone. But the conversation doesn't end there. Nicole adds, but I also think it's important to recognize that silence can be interpreted in many ways too. Alyssa responds, it can. But sometimes silence creates space for others to be heard. Nicole counters gently. And sometimes it creates a void where important issues lose visibility. There's another pause. The audience is completely engaged, no distractions, no side conversations. One of the hosts looks out at the crowd. You can feel how invested everyone is in this, she says. Then she turns back to the table. Let me ask both of you something, she says. Do you think this conversation would be happening the same way if the roles were reversed? That question shifts everything again. Alyssa raises her eyebrows slightly. What do you mean? She asks. The host clarifies. If someone in your position, Alyssa, spoke on something outside your expertise, would the reaction be the same as when a celebrity does it? The audience reacts immediately, this time louder, more divided. Alyssa takes a second to respond. I think there would still be scrutiny, she says. But it might look different. Nicole watches her closely. How so? Nicole asks. Alyssa exhales slightly. Because expectations are different, she says. People expect commentators to be informed. They expect celebrities to entertain. That line lands, and you can feel the shift instantly. Nicole's expression changes, not dramatically, but enough. I think that's a very narrow view, she says. The audience reacts, some clapping, some murmuring. Alyssa nods, but doesn't back down. It may be, she says. But it's also a reality. Nicole leans in again, her voice still calm but unmistakably firm. Maybe that's the problem, she says. And just like that, the tension rises again, stronger than before. Because now, the conversation isn't just about responsibility or influence. It's about perception, expectation, and identity. And neither of them is stepping away from it. The moment Nicole says that, maybe that's the problem. The entire tone of the table shifts again. There's a pause, not awkward, but heavy. The kind where everyone knows something real has just been said, and there's no easy way to move past it. Alyssa Farah Griffin doesn't respond right away this time. She leans back slightly, lips pressed together for a second, processing. Across from her, Nicole Kidman sits steady, composed, but there's a firmness in her posture now that wasn't there at the beginning. One of the co-hosts glances between them, then lets out a small breath. Okay, I think that just hit on something deeper, she says carefully. The audience murmurs in agreement. Alyssa finally nods. I understand what you're saying, she replies. That maybe the expectations themselves are limiting. Nicole gives a small nod. Yes, she says, because they put people into boxes. And once you're in that box, anything outside of it is questioned or dismissed. A few audience members clap, louder this time. Alyssa leans forward again, but her tone has shifted. It's still firm, but less confrontational, more reflective. I don't disagree that labels can be limiting, she says. But I also think expectations come from patterns, from what people are used to seeing. Nicole responds, just as measured. But patterns can change, she says. And they should if they're holding people back. The audience reacts with a wave of applause. One of the co-hosts smiles slightly. Okay, I feel like we're finally finding a little common ground here, she says. There's a light ripple of laughter from the audience, but the energy is still serious. Alyssa nods. I think we are, she says. Because I'm not saying people should stay in their lane forever. I just think there's a responsibility to approach certain conversations with care, awareness, and humility. Nicole nods again. And I agree with that, she says. Completely. There's a noticeable shift, subtle but real. For the first time, it doesn't feel like they're pushing against each other. It feels like they're meeting somewhere in the middle. But the conversation has left a mark, and everyone in the room knows it. One of the hosts leans in. I think what made this conversation so powerful is that it wasn't rehearsed, she says. This is exactly the kind of dialogue people are having at home, online, everywhere. The audience claps in agreement. Alyssa glances toward Nicole briefly, then back to the table. And I appreciate you engaging in it, she says. Because not everyone would. Nicole gives a small, genuine smile. I think it's important, she says. Even when it's uncomfortable. That line gets a strong reaction. Applause, a few yes, shouts from the audience. Another host jumps in. And it was uncomfortable at moments, she says with a light laugh. Let's be honest. The audience laughs too, easing the tension just a bit. Nicole nods, smiling slightly. Yes, it was, she admits. Alyssa smiles as well. But I think that's where the real conversations happen, she says. For a moment, it feels like closure. But the impact of what just happened is still lingering. Not just in the room, but beyond it. The camera cuts briefly to the audience, people nodding, some whispering to each other, others still focused on the table. One of the hosts turns toward the crowd. What do you all think? She asks. The reaction is mixed, but engaged. Applause, a few louder cheers, some thoughtful silence. Then the show begins to wrap the segment. Thank you for being here, Nicole, the host says warmly. Thank you for having me, Nicole replies. Alyssa nods toward her. It was a good conversation, she says. Nicole meets her gaze. It was, she agrees. The moment feels resolved, but not erased. Because as the show cuts to commercial, the conversation doesn't end. It shifts. Backstage, there's a different kind of energy. Staff members move around, some exchanging quick thoughts about what just unfolded. A producer is already looking at a monitor, replaying a moment from the discussion. You could feel that, someone says quietly. Another responds, yeah, that's going to be everywhere. And it is. Within minutes of the segment airing, clips start circulating online from The View. Short snippets, key lines. And who decides what reality is? Silence can do harm too. Maybe that's the problem. Social media picks it up fast. Some people praise Nicole for standing her ground, calling her composed, thoughtful, and authentic. Others side with Alyssa, saying she asked the harder questions and brought necessary accountability into the conversation. Clips are reposted, analyzed, debated. Comments flood in. She handled that with so much grace. Alyssa made valid points. This needed to be said. This is what real conversation looks like. This got tense, but it stayed respectful. More of this. Within hours, it becomes one of the most talked about segments of the day. Backstage, Nicole is seen speaking quietly with a member of her team. She looks calm but reflective. Alyssa, on the other side, is in conversation with a producer, nodding as they discuss the segment. There's no visible hostility, no dramatic fallout, but there is weight, because both of them know that what happened at that table wasn't just another segment. It was a moment, a real one. Later, as the show fully wraps and the audience clears out, a few attendees are still talking about it as they leave. That was intense, but in a good way. They didn't yell, but you could feel it. And that's exactly why it resonated. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was controlled, emotional, and honest. The kind of conversation that stays with people. And back online, the debate continues to grow. Clips from The View keep circulating, pulling in more reactions, more opinions, more perspectives. Because in the end, no one won that exchange. But everyone watched it. And everyone had something to say about it. So now we want to hear from you. Who do you agree with more? Do you think celebrities should speak out more, or step back and let others lead? Was Nicole right about the limits of expectations? Or did Alyssa make the stronger case about responsibility and impact? Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to the Star Talks for more real talk show stories.